So last week we finished on the conversation about cortices and somatic lateralization of functions. So basically we covered the superficial layer of the brain, right? The one that you voluntarily control. Now we're going to talk about white matter. It's not going to be really a long conversation here. So, as you may remember from the previous conversations, myelin, the protein that electrically insulates axons, gives a white color. So whenever you see white matter, you're effectively looking at axons of neurons. And if you remember anything about neuron, you should remember that axons are the parts of the cell that transmit the information. So white matter is all about communicating. So there are three main types of communicating fibers in the brain, in a central nervous system to be exact. So these are association, commissural, and projection fibers. Now, a very, very common misconception about nervous system is that we have nerves in the central nervous system. We do not. Does that make sense? So the axons are actually bundled in tracts. So each tract is not purely anatomically separated from others. Okay? But nevertheless, you can have bundles that connect very definitive origin and destination points. So what are those three types? So association fibers connect functionally related areas within the same hemisphere. For example, when you produce some type of a movement using your leg, the fibers, the areas of the cortex that control muscles of your thigh and your hip and your knee, all those cortical regions have to be involved. So association fibers allow that communication. Commissural fibers provide the connection between the regions in two opposite hemispheres that carry the same function. So, for example, if you ever tried to play drums, you know that it's really hard to play different drum patterns using your right hand versus your left hand, because right and left hand are coordinated through commissural fibers. The largest commissural fiber shown here, well, it's not a fiber, it's a structure in the commissural fibers. It's an agglomeration of commissural fibers. It is the corpus callosum, And then we have projection fibers. Projection fibers, they connect spinal cord with the cerebral cortex and back. So these fibers, as you can see here, the purple ones, they run vertically. If it's a motor fiber, it will run from the cortex down in the spinal cord. If it's a sensory fiber, it will run from the spinal cord to the cortex. Those fibers, the projection fibers, decussate, which means they cross over. And that explains why anatomically our left hemisphere, quote-unquote, controls our right side and vice versa. Now, if we look deeper into the cerebrum, beyond the white matter, we're going to discover a set of structures called basal nuclei. So the function of basal nuclei is very, very interesting. So first of all, nuclei, remember, this is the plural. term. So there are several nuclei. There's a caudate nucleus, there's putamen, striatum or striate nucleus, and the globus pallidus. So what is the function of basal nuclei? And that's really fascinating. Basal nuclei control your movements. We're going to talk more about that when we reach cerebellum, which is going to be pretty soon. But I want to highlight these two statements first. So when you are about to produce any kind of movement, I mean voluntary movement, whether it's writing, or talking to me, the muscles that execute that movement have to receive, and I am grossly anthropomorphic. I'm being grossly anthropomorphic right now. But these muscles have to receive an indirect approval from the basal nuclei. What does that mean? Your basal nuclei normally inhibit your muscles. If you are about to make a movement, that inhibition is removed. Okay? So a very important feature of basal nuclei is that they do not have a direct access to your muscles. They do not control your muscles directly. Basal nuclei effectively communicate with the motor cortex, relaying the information to it, issuing permissions for motor cortex to activate certain muscles. Okay? So they do receive a huge amount of sensory inputs, which we will discuss. So the point is, basal nuclei prevent your muscles from moving when you don't need them to move, don't need them to contract. So a couple of diseases listed here, Huntington's and Parkinson's, both involve basal nuclei. In Huntington's disease, when basal nuclei are degraded, people develop too much movement, let's put it this way. In Parkinson's, the situation is opposite. Basal nuclei are more active than they should be, and people's movement is impaired. Now we're going to jump deeper to the structure called diencephalon. Diencephalon consists of three separate parts that are not terribly functionally related: the thalamus, hypothalamus, and epithalamus. So overall, this is thalamus. What is the main role for this structure? If you would need to answer that question in one word, it's a relay of information. So thalamus is a sorting facility of your brain. It not only relays the information, but also groups the information functionally, filters out excessive signals to some extent, separates pleasant and unpleasant impulses.
And this is the function, right?
The function, yeah. Okay. The function is a relay. Okay, the function is a relay.
Okay.
And it can convey the signals sort of, anyway. So for instance, cerebellum and basal nuclei control your movements. Thalamus will convey the signals from cerebellum and basal nuclei to the motor cortices. Sensory inputs will be sent to association cortices and to sensory cortices. Now, you may wonder, why do we need this? Like, seriously. No, hear me out. Why do we need this? Like, what's the problem? For instance, why do we need to sort out and relay, for example, visual signals? Well, you have to consider that a visual signal creates a bunch of different, it regulates more than one function. One of them is obviously, you're seeing things. But then, for example, image processing, and I hope we're going to have time for a really, really cool little lecture, not by me, that I will play for you, but you have to be able to recognize people, right? Some people don't have that ability because a certain part of their brain is damaged, and thalamus relays the information to that part of the brain. Simpler example. If I will turn off the lights in this room, and it's going to be like 2 hours later, it's going to be pretty dark, and you're all going to be sleepy, because thalamus relays not only the visual information that you can consciously process, but also the simple fact that it's light outside, and it signals to hypothalamus, hey dude, it is, daytime, you should not be sleeping. And then light goes away, it signals to hypothalamus, and hypothalamus, puts you to sleep. Does that make sense to you? So overall, it's a major relay of signals. Now, common question, do you need to memorize all those nuclei? Absolutely not. Okay? It is the information that shows you what type of signals are processed in different types of the thalamus. Now, another structure found in Diencephalon is hypothalamus, which is annoyingly right here. So if we go back to this image, that blue part, yes, the one that I strike is hypothalamus, and it's actually quite a remarkable structure. Hypothalamus provides the control of your autonomic nervous system. Now, can anyone define the word or explain the word autonomic? Yes. Perfect. It's involuntary, yes. Autonomic responses are involuntary. And your hypothalamus controls not only just involuntary things, but also your responses to various types of emotions. For example, when you are scared or enraged, your heart rate goes up, your respiration increases, your palms start sweating. It's all hypothalamus. It controls your body temperature. It controls your sensations of hunger and satiety. Okay? Thirst, sleep-wake cycle. And it also provides an indirect control of your hormones by controlling the pituitary gland, which I don't think we can see here, but we can see here. So this structure right here is the pituitary gland, and this is hypothalamus, and you see they are connected through the infundibulum, so hypothalamus can control the pituitary gland. If we would want to characterize what it does, control of visceral responses to emotions. Question? It controls visceral functions, autonomic functions, organs, involuntary functions, endocrine system, sleep-wake cycle. So physiology, let's put it this way, your involuntary physiology. Now, this little structure right here is an epithalamus, which contains pineal gland. So to be fair, pineal gland is mostly active in children, and pineal gland secretes a hormone called melatonin. You probably are familiar with that term. So a quick disclaimer, if you go to any pharmacy and you see those multiple bottles of, like dietary supplements, 99% of them is a scam. And I'm saying this not because I'm jealous, since I am jealous that I did not invent this and did not become a millionaire, because it's a perfect scam, but some of them are really useful. Melatonin is one of them. It's not a sleep medicine, but it allows you to synchronize your sleep-wake cycle better. For instance, jet lag, or if you tend to go to bed late and want to establish normal sleep-wake cycles, then melatonin does work. 99% of that crap, you don't need it. It's just scam. Okay? In adults, though, pineal gland is largely fibrosed, so we do not produce as much melatonin as kids do. Now we are getting into the brainstem. So, still involuntary stuff. So, brainstem shown here. Okay? Brainstem is sort of a bridge between the cerebrum, the brain itself, and the spinal cord. There are three parts to it. So midbrain, which you kind of can see here, but it's a bit bent over. The pons and the medulla oblongata. Well, I gave it a bit too much credit. It's much smaller than that. So that's medulla. Okay? So, brainstem controls programmed automatic behaviors, or, as we call them, reflexes. Now, you're all probably familiar with the knee-jerk reflex, right? Now, let me ask you this. If you grab something that's hot, what you going to do? You're going to drop it and pull your arm away, right? So that's a reflex, but that's a somatic reflex, because this is your skeletal muscles that do that. Vegetative or visceral or autonomic reflexes are mediated by cardiac muscles or smooth muscles or glands. Think about this. When, let's take a child as an example, because they don't develop conscious control yet. When a child, like a little baby, when their rectum is filled with feces, they're going to poop. And that's because it's a reflex. Rectum stretches, sends the signal responds. It's not really a fair example because those reflexes are mediated largely by spinal cord, but you get the gist. Okay? Salivation is a reflex. If I will bring some tasty food in here that smells great, you're going to salivate. Okay? That's inevitable. And I want to emphasize, nothing can control those responses, okay? So the first part of the brainstem is the midbrain. So it's the most superior part. It's above the pons, so you can see this image is taken, it looks at the inferior aspect of the brain. So I'm going to highlight things that I can ask you about, functionally mostly, okay? So first of all, midbrain is responsible for pain suppression. Second, it's visual and auditory reflexes. So you all are very well familiar with those. Auditory reflex is a startle reflex. If you hear a loud sound, you turn your head towards it. And visual reflex, you don't have to tell me this, but we all know that if you're sitting on a bench and somebody's passing over, you're going to follow that person with your eyes. If there's a car driving, you're going to follow the car with your eyes. That's a visual reflex. That's normal. Okay, our ancestors had to do this because people who sucked at it got eaten. Okay? And then there's one of my favorite parts. There's a part of the midbrain called substantia nigra, which it controls, for example, addiction. Because it controls reward, and reward is linked to an addiction. Does that make sense? The most important neurotransmitter that's produced in the midbrain is dopamine. All your feel-good moments are surges in dopamine. Okay? And those feel-good moments can be caused by a variety of things, you know. You may like to, I don't know, just walk in a park, you know, or doing drugs. At the end of the day, you get addicted to that, okay? You like, because you don't get your dose of dopamine, obviously walking in the park is much better and healthier than doing drugs. The mechanism is the same, it's all midbrain. Now the important function of that dopamine that substantia nigra produces is to regulate the activity of basal nuclei, and you will see how this is important when we talk about the mechanism for Parkinson's disease. Okay? Now, two other parts, I'm going to highlight them here first, is pons and medulla oblongata. So, pons basically establishes the connection between motor cortex and cerebellum, and we're going to talk about that connection separately, okay? Another important function, so pons is kind of boring, okay? It's a little bulge on the brain stem. It does provide an important connection between the cerebellum and the motor cortex, and it contains the respiratory center. Now that respiratory center controls complex respiratory patterns like the ones that I'm producing right now. So let me ask you this, be fair. Like you are sitting right now, and you're listening to me and you're writing. Your respiration is pretty normal, you know, inhale, exhale. You know. I have to speak, so my respiration pattern will differ because humans can only produce sounds when they exhale. So I have to regulate my breathing pattern to be able to speak. That regulation, speaking, singing, whatever, is through the pons. Okay, and finally medulla. Right here, medulla oblongata. So, medulla oblongata, what I want you to... So, first of all, no questions about that table. I went absolutely belligerent here. Don't even pay attention to that. I want you to know the core ideas. Medulla provides visceral controls, visceral reflexes. You can pretty much name any system in the human body that is involuntary, and medulla will be involved. So all the activity that goes around your upper respiratory tract, coughing, sneezing, hiccuping, swallowing, salivating, lacrimating, it's all medulla. Lacrimation is tearing up. Okay? Digestive system controls, medulla. Heart, medulla. And it regulates them through basically reflexes. Quick example, when food gets into your stomach, medulla receives the signal that your stomach is distended and sends the signal back so your stomach can start churning up the food and break it down in pieces. Does that idea make sense? So it is major controller of visceral reflexes, and it is somewhat controlled by hypothalamus. Which brings us to cerebellum. So a lot of good news, okay? Like seriously good news. So cerebellum is located behind the brainstem. Okay? So there's a fissure right here that separates the cerebrum and the cerebellum. Now, it does consist of 3 lobes, but I will not ask you to identify the lobes on the anatomy exam, and I will not ask you about identifying individual functions because it's just way too much. Okay? It is connected to the cerebrum through the peduncles. Indirectly, but still. You don't need to identify the peduncles or know what they connect to. Okay? Hear me out. This is what you need to understand about cerebellum. Well, okay. Let's finish the anatomy and we'll talk. Okay, so first of all, I do not have the image. Let me go back here. Okay. You can't really see it. Let me make it bigger. So behind the medulla, okay, there's a connection between 2 hemispheres of the cerebellum. It's called vernum. Another thing that I want you to appreciate is that cerebellum, right here, has folds. Can you see that? Those folds are called folia, and just like with gyri and sulci in the cerebrum, they increase the surface area. Another anatomical feature is that just like with the brain, cerebellum literally means a small brain. Just like with the brain, there is white matter called arbor vitae, and there's gray matter, which is, well, the cortex. So now let's figure out, what does it do? So, you can ignore the right image, not for the reason that it's wrong, but for the reason it's overcomplicated. I'm going to use this to illustrate my point, okay? So let's say you decide to make a certain movement, okay? So for instance, I want to throw this can of sanitizing wipes and I want to hit the sink right there, okay? So I will have to produce a certain move with my arm. So the information of what kind of move I'm going to produce is being sent to cerebellum and basal nuclei. Okay? These are 2 bosses of movement which you can't control at all. So in addition to the information about the movement, cerebellum will also receive sensory inputs. Think about this. I need to assess how far the sink is, right? I need to understand the environment, like that I'm not going to hit the paper towel dispenser, for example. Okay, maybe there are people moving. Maybe I am moving. So all this visual information have to be taken in. Okay? I'm sitting now. Imagine if I'm standing. It's going to be a different throwing pattern. Imagine if I'm running. It's going to be a different throwing pattern. So the point is, it's not only visual inputs, it's also proprio inputs. Inputs about the position of your body, about your balance, about your joints and muscles. Okay? Am I making sense right now? So all these inputs reach cerebellum. Go ahead. Say it again? Yes. Yes. Excellent point. And I want to expand. You made a great point. Yes. We decide what we're going to do. I decide that I'm going to, throw this can into a sink. It's my decision. But the actual planning of that decision happens at the different level. It happens in basal nuclei and cerebellum. And we're going to, in a minute, I know I'm keeping the suspense, we're going to discuss what's the difference. But the point is, both of them then communicate their commands to the motor cortex, right? And motor cortex executes. So, do I know how to hurl the can across the room? I do. I send that signal to basal nuclei, and basal nuclei say, okay, we're going to uninhibit, we're going to release the inhibition from the muscles that you need. Not from my leg, not from my trunk. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Cerebellum, in the meantime, forms based on all the sensory information it received. It forms the exact pattern, like an instruction to your motor cortex, how much it has to activate each individual muscle. Am I making sense? In other words, your cerebellum makes your moves, all of them, highly coordinated. Okay? Go ahead. No. It's a good question. No. When you have a muscle memory, like riding a bike, right? Or juggling, I don't know. That's motor cortex, premotor cortex. Okay? That is motor cortex. Cerebellum, the easiest... Go ahead, actually. Go ahead. Ask a question. Yeah. Oh, it doesn't. No. And it goes at the same time. They work in parallel. You see what I'm saying?
So
Go ahead.
basically it's going to tell you how much energy you need to put into doing that in the target?
In every muscle movement, yes.
Okay.
So the easiest example is cerebellar hypoplasia, when cerebellum is underdeveloped. People are clumsy.
Yeah.
Okay? No. People with that condition are clumsy. Look at the baby. At a baby. Babies are super clumsy. One of the reasons, their cerebellum is not fully developed yet. They just don't have muscle coordination. Does that make sense? And going back to basal nuclei, look what happens if somebody has Parkinson's disease. Basal nuclei are incapable of removing the inhibition. Do you follow? So people's movements are inhibited. Yeah? In Huntington's disease, basal nuclei are pretty much gone. And people develop all kinds of involuntary muscle movements, so-called chorea. Okay? That makes sense? Which brings us to a limbic system, which is a fantastic topic to talk about. So limbic system is responsible for conscious control of your responses to motions. Okay? So the fact that you know that something is threatening or pleasant or enjoyable, it is mediated by the limbic system. Okay? Does that make sense? So the three elements of limbic system that I absolutely want to highlight, because there are a lot of things. Amygdala, hippocampus, and hypothalamus. Let's start with hypothalamus. So this structure, hypothalamus, we discussed it already, okay? It's responsible for your physiological responses to motions. Okay, like having your heart rate elevated in an acute stress environment. Okay, now if you work in the environment where you are exposed to chronic stress, hypothalamus will bring up cortisol levels. So all of these are physiological responses to your emotions. Now hippocampus is responsible for what we call a declarative memory. So what is declarative memory? Declarative memory is memorization of a list. When you study for your anatomy exam, it's a declarative memory. Let me explain. There is a declarative memory and there's a procedural memory. Okay? So, being able to play piano or ride a bike, it's a procedural memory. You really can't forget this. Not remembering the list, the anatomy list, it's totally normal. Like, you're going to forget it. I can tell you the strategy that my son used when he was taking his NP1 for the first time. It was a 5-week course. Like, it was brutal. Not with me. He was studying anatomy the night before the exam. I'm not saying that it worked for him, but he would absolutely cram the living shit out of the exam, still remember stuff in the morning, pass the exam. You can ask him like 1 day later, he cannot name a thing. Okay? He's not like. So for long term, it's not. No, of course. Okay? And I can tell you about cramming. It's one of my, there's a repetition, there's association, there are methods. But I still remember that I was at a conference where people presented a study. And in this study, they asked residents, MDs, second year residents, so pretty established physicians, all around the country, to take an exam that they took, I think, second or third year of medical school. It's an anatomy exam. It's a comprehensive human anatomy exam. Just, here's an exam, take it. The same exam that you took. Guess what? There was one specialty that didn't fail. Huh? Surgeons. Yeah, surgeons did not fail it, right? Because they have to know. It's like, they're like mechanics. But other than that, yeah, it's, so the idea behind this course, and I'm wearing away, but the idea behind this course is not that you walk out of here and you still know everything 40 years later. The idea is that you have a patient with a certain type of a problem. You're like, oh, I remember we're talking about this. I can go back and make an educated read about that condition. And I know what the words mean, and I know how different structures, interact and stuff. Okay? Does that make sense? And finally, amygdala. So amygdala is one of my favorite structures. It's responsible for long-term memory and fear. Two things that absolutely go hand in hand. I am very afraid of heights. Like, you cannot even believe how much I am afraid of heights. Like, if we have a lamp in our house, the outside lamp, like the second floor, it's out for 5 years. I'm not changing this shit. I'm not climbing that ladder. Like, I will shit my pants. I'm that terrified. So what? Huh? I have no problem with airplanes because I don't see the height. I don't see the height. I'm not afraid of height. I'm afraid of falling. But anyway, more than 10 years ago, my kids convinced me to go on a small roller coaster. The last thing I remember was, that moment when you look up in the sky before it goes down. I still vividly in color remember that moment because it was so frightening. I think I passed out after that, but it was so frightening that I still remember that. Fear makes the best memories. Okay? Poor phrasing. The long-lasting. Okay, not the best, but long-lasting memories. Okay? Actually, one interesting feature is that so-called Diencephalon or olfactory cortex and limbic system overlap. Now, you can probably remember the instances in your life when you sensed some smell and immediately thought it evoked some memories from the past, For me, it was when we came to States, we came to Nebraska for the first year. That's the proper reaction. That's an absolutely proper reaction. Why?
People live in Nebraska?
They do, unfortunately. Yeah, people do live in Nebraska. I don't know why. But so we came there, and it has the air had a smell, like just a smell of Nebraska. And then we lived in Louisiana for 8 years, and then we come back to Ohio, and we step out of the airport in Ohio. And my wife and I will both say, it smells like Nebraska. Midwest has its own specific smell, which is different from the South, completely different. And it immediately brought all the memories of us arriving to Lincoln, you know. Okay. So the last, go ahead, question. The last bit for today is reticular formation, which is, and I think I'm going to show you this little video today, and then we're going to proceed to the lab. So, what was I talking about? Yes, reticular formation. So it has several key features. So it mostly is contained within the brainstem, and it's responsible for your alertness. Okay? So based on the actions of reticular formation, you and think about it, makes sense because alcohol impairs the controls. So reticular formation will be responsible for sleep patterns. It will be responsible for alertness patterns. Another important, so damage to it, okay, results in you being not alert, not conscious for the rest of your life. So damage to reticular formation, if it doesn't kill, it will turn that, into a long coma. Does that make sense? Now, another really cool function of reticular formation is habituation. You know, if you think about the name habit, right? You form some kind of a habit. But what kind of habit? All of you are sitting on the chairs right now, and the surface of the chair presses against your butt. You don't really pay attention to this, do you? I hope, listening to me, but you don't really listen to the hum of HVAC system somewhere over there, because your brain cuts off repetitive or meaningless signals. Okay? When we moved to Ohio, first year we lived in Brooklyn. And our apartment was pretty close to fire station. And in about a month, we kind of got used to the fire trucks getting out in the middle of the night, and it didn't bother us. And then we bought a house in a much quieter place. And first night was unnerving, because our brain got so used to a certain level of noise that this quiet environment felt like abnormal. Make sense? And you think, okay, why are we talking about this? Because of this. Because of acid. The drug known as LSD effectively removes that filter. And your brain becomes flooded with sensory inputs that it's not prepared to process. One sec. I will try to comment. Disclaimer, I don't have an expert opinion in autism, but so what happens is your brain is flooded with all the sensory inputs, processes them in a weird way, and people are tripping balls. That's interesting thing. Out of many addictive drugs that we have, like nicotine and alcohol, LSD is not. It does not have physical addiction. So withdrawal does not have any physical symptoms, like, if somebody is an alcoholic and they don't drink, they become like really agitated and, withdrawal syndrome, right? I'm not even talking about opioids. LSD has nothing like that. Okay? Does that make sense? So, Now, if you think about what it means to be conscious and alert, it means to be able to respond to external challenges appropriately. And look what inhibits reticular formation. First of all is alcohol, right? So alcohol is a strong inhibitor. This is why we're less coordinated. Sleeping pills or tranks like barbiturates, for example. Okay? So barbiturates are used to treat often severe anxiety. And there is an absolute no-no. Consuming barbiturates and alcohol. I can bet if we will start Googling, we will find several celebrities that died because they did just that. Okay? Because you doubling down on the activity of reticular formation with alcohol and barbiturates, all of that results in very much depressed activity of reticular formation, and your heart stops and your brain stops functioning and you're not alert anymore. Does that make sense?
I got a question.
Sure.
So does RF have anything to do with,
I remember.
like brain damage, like your brain being brain being alive?
So, well, brain dead is a little different thing. We're going to talk about it on Wednesday. It's basically lack of electrical activity in the brain. And when they refer to the brain, they usually refer to the cerebellum, to the cortex.
Okay.
So conscious activity.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Okay.
Your question about whether or not it plays any role in autism, I don't know. That may be, because it was never my area of expertise. I don't know anyone who is, and does it have anything to do with autism? It probably does. But again, I don't know anyone, I don't have any experience with people who have, I had some experience with some people that are on the spectrum, but it was very, very to the light range of the spectrum. So their social life is minimally affected. Okay? Severely autistic, no.
So what's the difference between irreversible coma and being brain dead?
So in irreversible coma, there is an electrical activity in the brain.
Okay.
So I see my mom had like a
A what?
she had like a neurologic brain state.
Neurologic.
Brain state.
Yeah, she's in
Ah.
neurologic brain state.
I don't know what it is. No idea. Okay.
So
Yes.
you have like a traumatic event in your
Physically or psychologically?
like both. Like if something happens and you forget like worry to a certain portion,
Mm-hmm.
the limbic system that's
Yeah.
being affected where
It's limbic system.
is like walking out.
That's limbic system. That's you dragging me on a very, very thin ice, and I'm not competent to walk on that ice, really. If you're curious, there's a podcast called This Week in Neuroscience, and it is run by actual neuroscientists, not the people with a worm in their brain. But it's a bit on a more technical side, but it's still accessible. If you're willing to bypass on a lot of special terminology and listen to the conclusions, it's really good. Okay?